Hello there. Did you know an Englishman invented champagne? Okay, that's a slightly tenuous contention. However, there's quite a bit of truth in it. So today I'm going to be taking a look at a sparkling wine brand named in his honour. This is Digby Fine English. It's their non-vintage cuvée. So let me explain. Sir Kenelm Digby, a 17th century philosopher, polymath really, one-time pirate, or privateer actually, courtier, diplomat, possibly a spy, and a scientist. He was described as the ornament of England, and there's a Van Dyck portrait of him in the National Portrait Gallery. But how can I be claiming that an Englishman invented champagne and end up being immortalised by having a brand of English sparkling wine named after him? The point is that Digby's considered the father of the modern wine bottle. During the 1630s, amongst all the other stuff that he was doing, he owned a glassworks in a place called Newman-on-Severn. And at this glassworks, he pioneered a revolutionary way of producing bottles, or glass onions as they were referred to. And these were bottles with punts, they had a collar at the top, they had a long neck, so starting to look very much like a traditional wine bottle. Evidently his approach was to make the furnace much hotter by adding a wind tunnel to it. Then to make the glass, he used higher proportions of sand with less potash and lime than was normal. And the result were wine bottles that were stronger and more stable than was the case for other producers. And evidently, in 1662, at the end of some disputes, Parliament recognised Digby as the inventor of these processes. And thus he's a major contributor to the invention of champagne, because without a bottle that's strong enough to contain the pressure, champagne could never have been made into a sparkling wine. Now, the brand here, Digby Fine English, was created by Trevor Clough and Jason Humphries, who set out from the start with the idea that they would make world-class English sparkling wines. Now, neither of them had a background in winemaking. Evidently, Trevor was a management consultant, and Jason was a scientist working in operations management in the software industry. Now, the two partners released their first wine in 2013, based on the 2009 vintage. And as I say, they'd always aimed to produce a high-quality luxury product, and their first wines won a number of awards. Success was such that pretty quickly Jason and Trevor were able to quit their corporate lives in London and move down to Sussex to be in the heart of the wine industry and to build the Digby brand. Now, the brand was built on the idea that Digby was going to be the first negociant brand in English sparkling wine. This was very much a strategic decision, and they say that the wines are made from fruit grown in Kent, Sussex, Hampshire and Dorset. They're only working with the three principal champagne grape varieties, Pinot Noir, Chardonnay and Meunier, and they're working with vineyards with different soil types in the different regions, all different aspects, how they face the sun, different microclimates, and the idea is to build up a series of blending options from which Trevor, as the head blender, creates the Digby wines. Now, initially, Trevor and Jason went out and they ranked all the country's existing vineyards, and from those they selected a handful of partners from whom they set out to build a long-term community of wine growers. The approach has changed slightly because in 2021 they bought their first vineyard, acquiring a site in Hildenborough in Kent. Then subsequently in 2024 they've entered into a long-term lease with one of their existing growers. From the outset they've treated sustainability as being very important. For example, the bottles they're using have been specifically selected because they're 15% lighter than a standard sparkling wine bottle. One of the reasons for selecting Amarin as a cork supplier, although Amarin are one of the largest cork suppliers, is the fact that they are a carbon neutral supplier. They're specific in having no coatings on the muselet. Packaging boxes are all recycled. Road and air haulage are kept to a minimum, the idea being that shipping by sea is the most carbon effective way of doing that. And then on top of that, the company has a policy of planting trees to offset its existing carbon emissions. Now, coming back to the wine, since 2022, somebody called Ben Smith has been the winemaker, and he makes the wines at a facility called Itasca, which is a winery in Hampshire. Now, prior to 2022, these wines were made at Whiston by Dermot Sir Grew. If you've been watching some of my other English sparkling wine tasting videos, you may have watched a couple that I've made about Dermot, who is a very highly regarded long-term winemaker at Whiston. I'll actually leave a link at the bottom to a tasting of his wine, The Trouble with Dream, which I think should have some similarities to the style of this wine. So yes, looking at the Disgorgement date, this wine will have been made by Dermot Sir Grape. So following a typical English long cool growing season, Jason and Trevor will select those vineyards showing the terroir and micro-terroir characteristics that they're looking for to craft their wines from. And then the next stage was for Dermot to individually press and vinify these different lots of wine, from which Trevor will oversee the blending process. According to its label, this wine was made from fruit grown in Kent, Sussex and Hampshire. Now currently they do actually say they take fruit from Kent, Sussex, Hampshire and Dorset. So I don't know whether they were taking fruit from Dorset at this stage, but none made its way into this cuvee, or whether they hadn't started taking fruit from the Dorset vineyards at this stage. I think we can assume the fruit will have been hand-picked. Winemaking was done at the Wiston Winery in Sussex, where the fruit will have been whole bunch pressed. They have a traditional cockard, shallow champagne basket press to give some lovely clean juice. Now the wine was mostly fermented in stainless steel tanks, but 9% of the blending components fermented and then spent 8 months aging in seasoned Burgundy barrels. I believe that will principally be the Chardonnay component of this wine that will do that. And what goes on to happen is that there's a partial malolactic conversion done for the portion of the wine that fermented in stainless steel, but with malolactic conversion being blocked for the percentage of Chardonnay that fermented in barrel. The overall blend for this cuvee currently comprises 40% of Pinot Noir, 35% of Chardonnay and 25% of Meunier. Now this is a wine I've had in my cellar for a little while, so it's possible that this release of the cuvee has a slightly different blend, but in general they try and keep the proportions of 2/3 of Pinot Noir and Meunier to 1/3 of Chardonnay. So the blend should be somewhere akin to those proportions. And the idea of this blend is that it should highlight the breadth, the sort of the slight weightiness of the Pinot Noir, contrast with the Chardonnay, but the Chardonnay will have had some of its edge rounded out by the barrel fermentation and lees aging. And then the Meunier is there to add some, they describe it as plummy fruit. I'm thinking that's the sort of the beautiful perfume that Meunier tends to produce in England that they're talking about there. Because Trevor isn't looking for a highly autolytic stuff, he's looking up to show off the fruit that displays the terroir of England's vineyards. He doesn't use too much reserve wine, as I say, maximum of about 20% here, and the majority of that is Chardonnay, and it's not aged for too long. It will be from the previous vintage, so somewhere between a year and a year and a quarter old at the time that it gets put into the blend. Now once blended, the wine goes into bottle for its second fermentation and will continue to age on its lees for at least 24 months, and that's significantly more than the period of 9 months that's required by law for English sparkling wine. At Disgorgement, a 12 gram per litre dosage was added to help balance the wine's sharpness, and 12 grams per litre, the stage this was bottled, could be labelled as Brut. You're told when the wine is degorged because every bottle has a Disgorgement date on there, and this was degorged on the 8th of July 2017. And therefore, working backwards, I'm assuming that this is a wine that is mostly based on the 2014 vintage, so it's likely to have reserve wine from 2013 in it. So let's see what we make of it, shall we? The wine has a lovely fine bead and it's got a beautiful rich colour. I should say, and you might have guessed from that Disgorgement date, that this has been sitting in my cellar for about 3 or 4 years. So I'm expecting this will be quite a mature example of this. And I think that's what I'm seeing in this sort of medium yellow colour there. But yes, persistent fine bubbles rising there. Let's see what we make of the aromas, shall we? Gosh, there's quite a lovely, rich, toasty, slightly honeyed aroma, and behind that there are some sort of mineral notes. I would almost sort of suggest there's a sort of a chalkiness to it, although actually they do make the point that the Chardonnay in this was grown on green sand soils, not necessarily coming from chalk vineyards. I think possibly a little of the toasty aroma that I'm getting is displaying the wine's bottle age. All these aromas are beautifully harmonious, and there is almost a tiny touch of flintiness as well, possibly a fermentation note in the midst of all these aromas. So let's see what we make of it, shall we? The wine's dry. Got a lovely soft mousse of small bubbles, But right at the beginning of the palate, there's a real rush of mouth-watering, crisp, tart malic acid. Then sitting behind that, there's a little bit of a creaminess coming from the Dosage that leads to a rounded, appley fruit on the mid-palate. That fruit is more sort of fresh, green apple. Initially, I'm thinking of sort of Granny Smith sort of fruit. But then there are some honeyed notes behind that, and you start to see opening up more of a sort of a red apple note, a sort of a softer style of fruit. And sitting below all this, there's a really lovely, clean mineral acidity. Not the tart, malic, appley acidity that the wine started with, but actually a very well-defined, underlying sort of chalky acidity. Now the softness of the bubbles almost seems to continue on into the palate. Some of that may actually be the lovely, soft creaminess of the autolytic, the yeasty texture of the wine. I have to say though, in terms of flavour, there aren't lots of doughy, bready, brioche autolytic notes. It's there much more in the texture. There's a certain underlying toastiness, a sort of a honeyed nature, but really that line of fresh acidity running through the wine is giving a lovely length, and it's keeping those green apple and red apple notes running through the palate there. I wouldn't say that the wine has an obvious complexity. You've got this good intensity of well-defined appley fruit and an excellent underlying acidity, and the two of those are playing against each other really quite nicely. There is a fabulous mouth-watering element to the mid-palate, and while there aren't layer upon layer of complexity, this wine actually has a wonderful harmonious whole. The elements are working very well together to give what is a medium-bodied, relatively elegant wine quite nice intensity and length. Both the minerally notes and the appley mouth-watering sensation are enduring really well. A bead of tiny bubbles is still rising in my glass, but I do think that maybe this is a wine that's best drunk now. The bubbles fade. It's beautifully harmonious now. I don't necessarily think it's going to improve much with further aging. And in fact, having been in my cellar for 4 years, I would probably have done a little better if I'd have drunk it a year or so ago. Having said that, it's absolutely delicious. I think once again I'm seeing an English sparkling wine that's been beautifully made and shows that wines of its type are quite capable of rivaling those of Champagne and those made anywhere else in the world. There really is an excellent enduring sensation still in my mouth. Looking at the Wine Searcher aggregated critic score, this gets a 90 out of 100. I think it might be slightly hard done by. I would probably have given it a 91. But as I say, it's not a wine of enormous complexity, it's more one of balance and elegance. I've really enjoyed it. I hope you've enjoyed the tasting. If you've enjoyed the tasting, do please press the like button, and if you'd like to watch more of them, do please consider signing up and subscribing to my YouTube channel. I'd greatly appreciate your support in that way. If you have friends you think might like to watch the video, feel free to pass it on to them. I'd really appreciate your endorsement. If you have any comments, I'd love it if you'd leave those in the comments box below. It would be great to know what you think about the wines I'm looking at, the tastings I'm doing, or anything else that relates to that. I will of course leave a link to the Wine Searcher webpage for this wine in the notes below, so you can see if it's available in your market, and if so, at what price. So I hope you've enjoyed finding out about Sir Kenelm Digby and watching a tasting of the wine that's named after him. I do hope that maybe you'll manage to find some time and come and watch some more video tastings with me in the very near future. Until then, bye for now.